There are places where God forgets to look, where the snow falls so thick it buries memories, and the cold cuts so deep it numbs even regret. This is one of those places. The wind howls like a wolf mourning its pack, tearing across the frozen wilderness with a fury that seems almost personal. Snow falls in thick curtains, each flake a tiny knife against exposed skin. Visibility is measured in feet, not miles. The world has been reduced to endless white, merciless, unforgiving white. A figure emerges through the blizzard, a man on horseback, hunched against the storm like a question mark written in flesh and bone. His hat is pulled low over his eyes, the brim crusted with ice that glitters in what little light penetrates the gray sky. His coat, dark leather, worn from years of use, is stiff with frost. Beneath him, his horse struggles, each step sinking deep into powder that reaches past its knees. The animal's breath comes in great clouds of steam that are instantly torn away by the wind. The cowboy's name is Thomas Cade, though he hasn't spoken it aloud in months. His lips are cracked and bleeding from the cold. His eyes blue as frozen water scan the emptiness ahead with the desperate intensity of a man who knows he's running out of time. His fingers, even inside thick gloves, have gone numb. He can barely feel the reins anymore. "Come on, girl," he mutters through chattering teeth, his voice nearly lost in the roar of the storm. "Just a little further, we can't stop now." The horse whinnies, uncertain, as if questioning the wisdom of continuing. Thomas understands. He's been questioning it himself for the past hour. But stopping means death. Out here, in this frozen hell, motion is life. Stop moving, and you become just another shape buried beneath the snow, waiting for spring to reveal your frozen corpse. Then, suddenly, he sees it. A shape, dark against the endless white. Thomas squints, wondering if exhaustion and cold have finally driven him to hallucination. But no, it's real. A cabin, half collapsed, and listing to one side like a drunk trying to stay upright. The roof has caved in on the northern end, timbers jutting out like broken ribs. But from somewhere inside, impossibly smoke rises, thin, desperate, but unmistakably real. Thomas's heart lurches in his chest. Someone's alive in there. He dismounts, his legs nearly buckling as his boots hit the ground. The world tilts for a moment, and he grabs the saddle horn to steady himself. When his vision clears, he ties the horse to a dead tree and staggers toward the cabin. Each step is a battle against wind and snow and his own failing body. His boots crunch through ice, breaking through the crust into the softer powder beneath. As he gets closer, something catches his eye. There, beside the door, a handprint in the snow, small, delicate, a woman's hand, and staining the white around it, barely visible in the failing light blood. His pulse quickens. Whatever's happening inside that cabin, it's not good. The door hangs on a single hinge, swaying slightly in the wind. Thomas pushes it open, and it groans like a dying thing, the sound somehow audible even over the storm. He steps inside, and the wind immediately drops to a muffled roar. The air inside is thick with wood smoke and something else, the sharp, metallic scent of fear. The fire in the stone hearth is barely alive, just a collection of glowing embers that paint the interior in shades of orange and shadow. The cabin is small, one room, maybe 12 feet square. Half the floor is covered in snow that's drifted through the collapsed roof. Broken furniture lies scattered, and there, huddled in the far corner wrapped in a torn quilt, is a woman. She's small and pale, her face gaunt with hunger and exposure. Her dark hair is tangled with frost and hangs in matted ropes around her shoulders. But it's her eyes that hit Thomas like a physical blow, wide, terrified. The eyes of someone who's been running from something terrible and knows she's finally been caught. Those eyes are locked on him with the intensity of a trapped animal. "Don't," she whispers, her voice cracked and broken from cold and disuse. "Please don't." Thomas stops just inside the doorway. Slowly, carefully, he raises both hands, showing her his palms. "I'm not here to hurt you, ma'am," he says, keeping his voice as gentle as he can manage through his chattering teeth. "I'm just lost, same as you, I reckon." She doesn't move, doesn't even blink. Her arms tighten around the bundle she's clutching to her chest. Then Thomas hears it, a sound so soft he almost misses it beneath the wind. A whimper, a tiny, desperate sound that goes straight to his heart. His eyes drop to the bundle in the woman's arms, and he realizes what he's seeing. A baby, wrapped in rags and barely visible, its tiny face red from the cold, lips trembling. Something inside Thomas breaks. Some wall he's been building for 3 years cracks and crumbles. "How long you been here?" he asks, his voice softer now, stripped of everything but genuine concern. The woman's lips tremble. Tears streak through the dirt on her face, leaving clean trails like rivers through dust. 3 days, she whispers. Maybe 4. I lost count. Thomas moves slowly, carefully, like a man approaching a wounded deer. He kneels by the pathetic fire and pulls wood from his saddlebag. He always carries extra, has ever since that winter 5 years back when he nearly froze to death himself. He feeds the dying flames. The fire catches, grows, begins to put out real heat. Light floods the cabin, pushing back the shadows. And that's when Thomas sees the woman's face clearly for the first time. He freezes. The wood slips from his numb fingers. The world tilts again, but this time it has nothing to do with exhaustion or cold. This time it's because he's staring at a ghost. "No," he whispers. The word is barely audible, more breath than sound. The woman stares at him, confusion replacing some of the fear in her eyes. "What?" Thomas can't breathe, can't speak. His hands shake as he pulls off his hat and runs his fingers through his snow-wet hair. "This isn't possible. It can't be. She's dead. He buried her. He mourned her. He rode into these mountains to die because living without her was worse than death." "Sarah?" The name comes out broken, a question and a prayer and an accusation all at once. The woman's eyes go wide. What little color remained in her face drains away completely. The bundle in her arms slips and she clutches it tighter. "Thomas?" She breathes. Silence falls between them, heavy and impossible. The fire crackles, oblivious to the moment it's witnessing. Outside, the wind continues its endless howl. But inside the broken cabin, time has stopped. In that moment, time folded in on itself. Because Cowboy Thomas Cade was looking at a ghost, his wife, dead 3 years, or so he'd been told. 3 winters ago, Thomas had ridden out to sell cattle in Cheyenne. It was supposed to be a 2-week trip. He'd kissed Sarah goodbye at dawn, promised to bring her back cloth for a new dress and sugar for baking. He'd looked back once as he rode away, and she'd been standing in the doorway of their little homestead, one hand raised in farewell, smiling. When he returned 3 weeks later, delayed by storms and bad roads, his homestead was ash. The cabin, the barn, everything reduced to blackened timbers and smoke-stained stone. The marshal in the nearest town told him raiders had come through, outlaws. They'd burned everything, killed everyone. Said they'd found a woman's body in the rubble, burned beyond recognition but wearing Sarah's wedding ring. Thomas had buried an empty casket in the little cemetery outside town. He'd stood there in the rain and felt something inside him die. Then he'd climbed back on his horse and ridden into the mountains with no intention of ever coming back. But here she is, alive, real, shaking not from cold but from shock, staring at him like he's the ghost. "They told me you were dead," Sarah says, her voice barely above a whisper. "They said you never came back." They said her voice breaks and she can't continue. "Who?" Thomas manages to get the word out past the tightness in his throat. "Who told you that?" "The men. The ones who burned our home." The words come out in a rush now. Like poison she needs to expel. "They took me, Thomas. Kept me in a camp in the mountains for months. There were other women they'd taken. When I finally got away, I had nothing. No name, no past, no home. Just..." She looks down at the bundle in her arms, at the tiny face of the infant. Just her. Thomas stares at the child, his mind racing to make sense of what he's hearing. Numbers align themselves in his head with cruel precision. "How old?" he asks. 5 months. His jaw tightens. The math is painfully clear. 9 months in captivity. 5 months old. The baby is his daughter, a child he never knew existed until this moment. He moves closer, slowly, afraid that sudden movement will shatter this impossible reality. He reaches out with a trembling hand. Sarah watches him but doesn't pull away. His fingers touch the baby's tiny hand, so small it seems impossible she's real. The infant's fingers curl around his thumb with surprising strength. The touch is warm and alive and real. Something inside Thomas, something he thought had died and been buried 3 years ago, stirs to life. It hurts, this resurrection. It hurts worse than any wound he's ever taken. But it's also the sweetest pain he's ever known. "What's her name?" His voice breaks on the question. Sarah shakes her head, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. "I didn't give her one. I didn't think we'd survive long enough for it to matter." Thomas looks at Sarah, really looks at her for the first time since he walked through that door. He sees the woman he loved, the woman he married under an oak tree one spring morning with wildflowers in her hair. But he also sees what the years have done to her, the hollowness in her cheeks, the shadows under her eyes, the way she holds herself like someone who's forgotten what safety feels like. She's been through hell, and somehow, impossibly, she's survived. "You're both surviving," he says, and there's iron in his voice now, a determination that surprises even him. "Starting right now." Outside, the wind screams louder, as if enraged by his defiance. The walls of the cabin shudder. Snow pours through the broken roof in a white cascade, but Thomas doesn't care. He works fast, stripping blankets from his saddlebag and wrapping them around Sarah and the baby. He builds up the fire until it roars, pushing real heat into the space. He melts snow in his tin cup for water. He shares his dried meat and hardtack, watching Sarah eat like someone who's forgotten how food tastes. "How'd you end up here?" he asks as she eats. Sarah swallows, her throat working like the simple act is difficult. "I was traveling with a wagon train, heading west. We got caught in the storm 2 days ago. The baby wouldn't stop crying. She was cold and hungry, and I had nothing to feed her. The others," her voice turns bitter, "they said we'd slow them down. They left us." The wagon master pointed to this cabin and said, "If we could make it here, we might survive." Then they rode away. "Waited for what?" Thomas asks, though he's afraid he already knows the answer. She looks at him and her eyes glisten in the firelight. "For the end," she says simply. "Or maybe a miracle. I wasn't sure which would come first." Thomas swallows hard past the lump in his throat. "You got both." The baby starts to cry, a thin, weak sound that tears at Thomas's heart. Sarah tries to soothe her, but she's too exhausted, swaying where she sits. Thomas reaches out, hesitates, then asks, "May I?" Sarah looks at him for a long moment. Then, slowly, she nods. Thomas lifts the baby so impossibly small, so fragile she seems like she might break into his arms. He holds her against his chest, starts to rock, gently, instinctively. He hums something low and soft, a lullaby his own mother sang to him a lifetime ago. He doesn't even remember deciding to do it. The melody just comes, rising from some deep place he'd forgotten existed. The baby quiets. Her tiny fist curls against his chest. Thomas looks down at her and feels something crack open inside him, something warm and terrible and wonderful all at once. Sarah watches them, tears streaming freely now. "I thought I'd never see you again," she whispers. "I thought the same," Thomas replies, not looking away from his daughter's face. Outside, something crashes a tree, falling under the weight of ice and wind. The horse screams, a sound of pure animal terror. Thomas's head snaps up, every instinct suddenly screaming danger. He carefully hands the baby back to Sarah and grabs his rifle from where it leans against the wall. "Stay here," he says, and then he's out the door and into the storm. The world outside is chaos. The wind has reached a fever pitch, howling like all the demons in hell have been unleashed. His horse is rearing, panicked, eyes rolling white, and there, moving through the snow like darker shadows against the white, are shapes, men. Thomas counts 4 of them, their faces hidden by scarves, guns drawn and visible even through the storm. Thomas raises his rifle, planting his feet in the snow. "That's far enough," he shouts over the wind. The lead man stops about 20 feet away. He reaches up and pulls down his scarf, revealing a face that looks like it's been carved from granite and then shattered with a hammer. Scars crisscross his cheeks, and a thick white line runs from his left eye to his jaw. His eyes are like chips of ice, cold and dead. "Well, well," the scarred man says, his voice surprisingly cultured. "Didn't expect company out here in this weather. You picked a hell of a place to make camp, friend." "Cabin's occupied," Thomas says, his voice flat and hard. "Move on." The scarred man tilts his head, studying Thomas like he's a specimen in a jar. "Can't do that, friend. See, we've been tracking someone. A woman. She stole something from us. Something valuable." Thomas's blood runs cold. His finger tightens on the trigger of his rifle. "There's no one here but me." The scarred man grins, and it's one of the most unpleasant expressions Thomas has ever seen. "Now, see, I think you're lying, because that horse there looks fresh, hasn't been standing in the cold as long as it should have been. And I smell smoke. Smoke means fire. Fire means people, plural." He takes a step forward, and Thomas sees the other 3 men spread out slightly, flanking. They know what they're doing. This isn't their first time. "We just want the woman." The scarred man continues, his voice reasonable, almost friendly. "Hand her over and you can walk away. Hell, we'll even let you keep your horse. No harm, no foul. What do you say?" Thomas cocks the rifle. The sound is sharp and clear even over the wind. "Over my dead body." The scarred man's grin widens. He laughs, and it's a sound like breaking glass. "Friend, that can definitely be arranged. There are moments when a man must choose. Between survival and honor, between walking away and standing firm, between the easy path and the right one." Thomas Cade had been running from his past for 3 years, riding deeper and deeper into these mountains, hoping the cold and the silence would finally give him the peace that had eluded him since that day he'd returned to find his life reduced to ash. But here, in this frozen wasteland, with the woman he loved and the child he'd never known alive in that broken cabin behind him, running was no longer an option. Thomas doesn't lower the rifle. His voice, when he speaks, is quiet, but carries a weight that makes even the wind seem to pause. "I'm giving you one chance. Turn around, ride away. Forget you ever saw this place." The scarred man's grin fades. "And if we don't? Then we settle this the old way." The 4 men spread out, forming a half circle. Thomas calculates quickly 4 against 1. His rifle holds 6 shots. He needs to drop at least 2 before they close the distance. Then it becomes knife work. The odds aren't good. Actually, the odds are terrible, but he doesn't move, doesn't even blink. Inside the cabin, Sarah clutches the baby tighter, listening to the voices outside. She knows those voices, knows what they're capable of. She's seen what they've done to women who displeased them, seen the casual cruelty with which they destroy anything in their path. She looks at the broken door, at the snow swirling through the gap. She can hear Thomas's voice, steady and unwavering, and something inside her shifts. For 3 years she's been running, been hiding, been surviving by making herself small and invisible. She's accepted scraps and slept in ditches and lived like a ghost, because that's what you do when you have nothing left but survival. But listening to Thomas out there, the man she thought was dead, the man she loved, standing alone, against 4 killers, she realizes she's done running. She lays the baby down carefully, wrapping her in every blanket and quilt she can find. She kisses her daughter's forehead, tasting salt and cold. "Mama will be right back," she whispers. Then she stands, her legs shaking but holding. She finds a rusted axe in the corner, its handle wrapped in ancient leather. It's heavy and awkward in her hands, but she grips it tight. She moves toward the door. Outside, it happens fast. The scarred man's hand moves toward his gun, and Thomas fires. The shot booms like thunder. The scarred man drops, a red flower blooming in the center of his chest. The snow around him turns pink, then red. The other 3 rush forward with shouts of rage. Thomas fires again, drops one more. The man spins and falls face first into the snow, but then they're on him. One grabs the rifle barrel, yanking it from his grip. Thomas lets it go and swings his fist instead, catching the man in the jaw. Bone cracks and the man stumbles back, spitting blood and teeth. But the 3rd man is behind Thomas now, arms snaking around his throat in a chokehold. Thomas claws at the arm, but his fingers are still numb from the cold and find no purchase. His vision starts to darken at the edges. The man's breath is hot and foul against his ear. "Got you now, you son of a..." The cabin door flies open with a bang. Sarah bursts out into the storm, the axe raised high, and she's screaming a primal, furious sound that seems to come from somewhere deep in the earth. She brings the axe down with all her strength, and it buries itself in the man's shoulder. He releases Thomas with a howl of agony. Thomas spins, gasping for air, and his hand finds his knife. He draws and slashes in one smooth motion. The blade finds the man's throat. The man falls, blood steaming in the cold air. The last man still standing raises his gun at Sarah. Time slows. Thomas can see the man's finger tightening on the trigger, can see Sarah's eyes going wide, can see his daughter's face in his mind. Thomas shoots him. The bullet takes the man in the chest. He crumples like a puppet with cut strings. Silence falls, thick and heavy. The only sound is the wind and their ragged breathing. Thomas and Sarah stand there in the snow, covered in blood and frost, staring at each other. 4 bodies lie around them, already beginning to be buried by the falling snow. Then Sarah's legs give out. Thomas catches her before she hits the ground, lifting her into his arms. She weighs almost nothing. He carries her back into the cabin and lays her gently by the fire. He tends her wounds, minor cuts, bruises. Nothing serious beyond exhaustion and exposure. The baby sleeps through everything, wrapped in her cocoon of blankets, oblivious to the violence that just saved her life. Thomas works in silence, his hands steady despite everything that just happened. He's done this before, patched wounds, cleaned blood, kept people alive when death was breathing down their necks. When he's finished, Sarah looks up at him. Her eyes are heavy, fighting to stay open. "Why'd you come back?" she asks, her voice barely above a whisper. Thomas sits back on his heels. He looks at the fire, at the baby, at the broken cabin that's somehow keeping them all alive. "I didn't," he says honestly. "I was just lost. Riding. Trying to outrun ghosts and memories. Figured I'd keep riding until the cold took me or I rode off the edge of the world. Didn't much care which came first." "And you found one," Sarah says. "A ghost." He looks at her and manages a smile, sad and weary and real. "I found you." She reaches up with one hand, trembling from exhaustion or cold or emotion, and touches his face. Her fingers are ice against his skin, but he leans into the touch like a man dying of thirst, finally finding water. "What now?" she asks. Thomas looks at the baby again, at her tiny face, peaceful in sleep. He looks at Sarah, at the woman he married and mourned, and found again in the last place he ever expected. He looks at the fire burning warm and bright, pushing back the cold and the dark. "Now," he says, and his voice is stronger than it's been in 3 years. "Now we go home, we build again. We give her a name and we raise her and we live. That's what we do now." "What name?" Sarah asks, and there are tears in her eyes, but she's smiling. Thomas thinks for a moment. He thinks about the storm outside, about the odds they beat, about finding each other again when both of them thought the other was gone forever. He thinks about the baby who survived against all reason, about second chances and new beginnings. He smiles, really smiles for the first time in 3 years. "Hope," he says. "We name her Hope." Sarah's tears spill over, tracking through the dirt on her face. She nods, unable to speak. Thomas pulls them both close, his wife, his daughter, and holds them, while the fire burns and the storm rages, and the night slowly gives way to something that might, eventually, become dawn. They say a cowboy once spotted a woman and baby in a collapsed cabin and realized he'd found the family he'd lost years ago. Some call it fate, others call it miracle. Thomas Cade called it a second chance, and he held onto it with both hands, like a man who knows he won't get a third. In the coldest winter, in the darkest hour, in a broken cabin in the middle of nowhere, he found what he'd been searching for all along. Not in the past, not in the distance, not in the bottom of a bottle or the silence of the mountains, but here, in the ruins and the snow and the firelight, in the eyes of the woman he loved and the face of the daughter he'd never known. The storm began to clear as dawn approached. The wind died down to a whisper. Through the broken roof, Thomas could see stars cold and distant, but beautiful in their constancy. He held his family and watched the light change from black to gray to the faintest hint of blue. "We should go when the storm clears," Sarah murmured against his chest. "Those men might have had friends." "We will," Thomas promised. "I know a place, a valley 2 days' ride from here. Good water, good grazing. We'll rebuild there, build something better than before. Just the 3 of us. Just the 3 of us," he confirmed. "A family." The baby stirred and made a small sound. Sarah shifted to nurse her, and Thomas stood, adding more wood to the fire. He went to the door and looked out at the slowly brightening world. The bodies of the men who tried to take his family were already buried under fresh snow, becoming part of the landscape. By spring, they'd be gone completely. He thought about the years he'd lost, the time he'd wasted trying to die because he thought he had nothing left to live for. He thought about how close he'd come to riding past this cabin, to missing this moment entirely. An hour earlier or later, and he never would have seen the smoke. Another path, and he'd have missed them completely. But he hadn't. He'd found them. Or maybe they'd found him. Maybe that's what miracles were, not divine intervention, but impossible timing, the universe aligning just right for just a moment. Behind him, Sarah hummed softly to Hope. The baby made contented sounds. The fire crackled, and for the first time in 3 years, Thomas Cade felt something he'd thought he'd never feel again. He felt home. Sometimes that's all it takes. A storm, a cabin, the courage to hold on when everything tells you to let go, the willingness to fight when fighting seems hopeless. The decision to stand firm when running would be easier. Thomas Cade had been lost for 3 years, but on that night, in that broken cabin, With the snow falling and the fire burning and his family safe in his arms, he found himself again. And that, perhaps, was the greatest miracle of all. For those who wander, for those who wait, for those who believe in second chances, there is always hope. Even in the coldest winter, even in the darkest hour, even when all seems lost, there is always hope. And sometimes, hope has a name and a face and fits perfectly in the curve of your arms. The sun rose slowly over the mountains, turning the snow from white to gold. Thomas Cade stood in the doorway of the collapsed cabin, his wife and daughter behind him, and watched the world wake up. He smiled. And then, together, they began the journey home.